In today's episode, I want to discuss 3 different true crime documentaries. As well as that, because we're nearing Halloween and we're in the month of October, I wanted to discuss some of my favourite Halloween movies to watch over the month of October, as well as a few movies and TV shows that I have on my bucket list for this Halloween. I'm really excited to discuss these documentaries, so let's get into it. The first true crime series I want to discuss is Killer Inside the Mind of Aaron Hernandez. This was released in 2020, it's available up on Netflix and has 1 season. It currently has 67% on Rotten Tomatoes and a 7.4 out of 10 on IMDb. And I'm pretty sure it's a 3-part documentary series, so 3 really long episodes throughout the season. This documentary has been on my list to review and discuss for a while. I kept on putting it off because it is very heavy and there is a lot in it. And when I first started off doing these episodes on true crime, I wanted to talk about something a bit more, not light, but a bit more easy to get through. Because even though there's only 3 episodes in this documentary series, they get through a lot. They go through years of this man's life. This documentary focuses on Aaron Hernandez, who went from one of the NFL's biggest rising stars to convicted killer. The documentary tracks his life, his progress in the NFL, his career, his marriage, his background, his family background, his upbringing, everything, including the crimes and murders he was eventually convicted for. Anyone who's unaware of the Aaron Hernandez story, let's give you a bit of background. Like I said, he was an NFL star at the time of his conviction, one of the best in the NFL. He was touted to be the man. He had just signed a new contract for $40 million. He was living the life he wanted to live, and he was a very talented football player. However, this quickly came to an end when he was arrested for the suspected murder of his friend Odin Lloyd. Now, when he was arrested, this came as a surprise to everyone who knew him, and obviously everyone wrote it off as a fake story and this can't be real, this is not happening. And once Aaron Hernandez was arrested, his change in his mindset and his erratic behaviour became very clear to the police. The documentary displayed that Aaron Hernandez was suffering from very paranoid thoughts, intrusive thoughts about people getting him and trying to kill him, and this was happening months before Odin Lloyd was murdered. And I don't know where this came from. It all happened all of a sudden, but in the documentary they actually tie it to CTE. CTE is a degenerative brain disease that is very common amongst NFL players, and rugby players as well get it sometimes too, but it's predominantly associated with NFL players. The amount of times those players clash into each other, they get concussion after concussion, and if it goes untreated, the brain swells and it can cause brain damage, personality change, dementia even, and depression. The documentary does a great job shedding light on this. There has been NFL players in the past who have committed suicide and left their brain for science in their suicide note. And when these players' brains were scanned and studied, it showed that they all suffered from CTE. So there is a direct link between CTE and these players committing suicide, especially out of the blue like this. I personally do think that Aaron Hernandez was suffering from CTE for probably years, because when he was in prison, they had recorded phone calls between him and his wife from prison, and he's just totally detached from his reality. I know some people probably do that. It's probably a survival mechanism for some people going to prison. Prison is in your mind, that kind of thing, and it's all about where you are in your mind, not where you are physically. You can be in prison, but in your mind you're free, that kind of stuff. But he just seemed totally fucking spaced out. He wasn't in prison. He said he was thinking of it as training camp, and on the calls he didn't sound depressed. He didn't sound, I just want to get out of here. He was like, oh yeah, I'll get out. He was totally detached from reality, and he was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna get out, I'm innocent, even though the evidence had piled up against him. There's one thing about this documentary that came out that didn't sit right with people. It's been out since 2020, so it's not really that much of a spoiler, but in the trial they had to come up with a defense, obviously, and one of the biggest defenses was they played on Aaron Hernandez's sexuality. Now, I don't know if this is true. Like, most times, I think I've mentioned this before, most times as viewers, we only believe what is put in front of us, and we can only take in the information that we're given. At one stage, the defense became centered on Hernandez's sexuality, and the narrative that was being pushed by the defense, I think it was the defense. It was that he was a closeted gay man in the NFL. He was terrified of losing everything because he didn't want to come out as gay. He wasn't ready to accept those things about himself yet, and he was fighting these urges he had, and this made him act out in aggression. This made him very paranoid about things. That's why he didn't want certain people around him. This is why he didn't want phones around him, because he thought it was being recorded the whole time. And this made him, like I said, act out in aggression, and his behavior totally changed because of it, because he was completely on edge, because he had this secret that he was sitting on. And this made him kill Odin Lloyd. The narrative was that Odin Lloyd was going to out this secret. He knew something that Aaron Hernandez didn't want him knowing about his sexuality, and he killed him because it was the only option to keep everything he had built up. At this stage in the documentary, they do focus on the culture of the NFL for a while. Obviously, when they address the fact that Aaron Hernandez does not feel comfortable coming out as gay as an NFL player, they have to dive into that. So they do have, not testimonies, but interviews from NFL players who have come out. There was one guy in particular, big burly looking fella, and he was saying that he struggled for years with his sexuality. In his interview, he explains that when he was struggling with the fact that he was gay and an NFL player, he felt the stigma around that. So there obviously is a stigma with men in sports like this, because there's a stigma around NFL players and rugby players. They're big burly looking motherfuckers. They're all fucking built like shit brick houses. They're tough looking bastards. So like, how could they be gay? There's a stigma around that. And I think in his interview he put it very well. He said that, or he kind of went along the lines of saying that, you almost don't feel like a man. You feel weak, and you feel like less of a man knowing that you're gay in this sport. And it was really bittersweet to hear him talk, because obviously bitter because he had struggled for so long, and he did so much psychological damage to himself in trying to cover up his sexuality and hide his sexuality from the world and himself. In his interview he said, I just tried to eat like shit. I tried to make myself the most unattractive I could be so that no one would even look at me that way. And that when someone looked at me, they could say for a fact, he doesn't look like a gay man, so he must be straight. So he wouldn't have to explain anything away. And as well as that, he didn't want to have to explain why he wasn't going out on dates with girls. So that's why he liked being overweight and looking like a slob as well, because that was a built-in excuse. Because when people see you looking like that, they're going to be like, oh, well, of course you're not getting dates. Look at how you're acting, Clean yourself up and you might get a date. But yeah, that was a built-in way of living that he had to make sure that his cover was never blown, that his sexuality was never discovered. And it was so disheartening to see that that stigma makes people live that way just to play the sport they love. Like, he had to sacrifice so many years of happiness just to play the sport that he loves. And when he told the story about him coming out to his parents, it was so sweet, because he had it on his chest for ages, and I'd say the day he told them, he probably thought his world was going to collapse. But anyway, I digress. The point is, this part of the documentary was kind of outlining the reasons why Aaron Hernandez did not feel comfortable coming to terms with his sexuality as an NFL player. Since the documentary series has aired, Hernandez's wife has actually come out and condemned the actions of both the Netflix series and his lawyer for putting his sexuality on a show like that. Hi guys, hope you all enjoyed this short highlight clip. If you did and you want to check out my full episodes, you can always check out my podcast Finding Yourself up on Anchor FM and Spotify. The links are available in the description. Thanks for listening.